Hello, this is Vale and welcome to my channel. Now, before I move on to anything, I would like to thank every one of you who have subscribed to my channel. And I have actually got a lot of positive feedbacks on Twitter, on Reddit, and even on custom emails. So, actually, there are people claiming that I have actually done a good job teaching other people about cybersecurity and especially SQL injection, which has been, the topics for the last week now. So actually I'm very glad to be in that position and I want to actually continue being in that position for a long time. So today's video is actually on various requests from Reddit and Twitter that I should also do blind SQL injection attacks. Now, just to be clear that if you are new to this topic, you should probably go to the first video of mine on the basics of SQL injection, then move on to the second video, which is how I actually apply what I have taught on the first tutorial on a live website, which is of course kept intentionally vulnerable by the developers. And in this today's video, I'm going to be doing blind SQL injection attacks. Now, the blind SQL injection attack is very much time consuming and it's pretty hard to do actually. So I will always recommend you to use SQL map and automated tools to perform this kind of attacks. But people like me who like to, see what is under the hood, so for them this video is going to be a good one, I guess. So now let me move on to the tutorial part. So what is blind SQL injection? So if you remember from the first two videos, that when we actually gave a query or submitted a search value onto a website, what I used to get was a result back to me by the website saying that this is what you have requested for and we have this, this costs this much, this is from this company. So we get an actual result which is directly pulled from the SQL server and being thrown to the user's computer or mobile phone. So we have a space for us to actually perform malformed queries, which is basically SQL injection. So we have a lot of space for actually performing SQL injection, send that malformed query to the server and actually see on plain text on the screen the replies that has been given by the SQL server. But in case of blind SQL injections, we do not actually have that privilege. So what happens, maybe say that we have a search box and we just typed in a name and hit enter. What we get is just a response from the website that yes, this user exists or this user doesn't exist. So this is always going to be a Boolean value, which means we are just going to get a true or false response from the website, and we cannot actually see anything even starting from the actual error being happening. So if you have looked on the previous videos of mine or have performed SQL injection in your life as well, you know that when we actually do a malformed query, we get a report from the SQL server that yes, this particular SQL query is not right and we have a problem in this position of the query after this symbol. So we actually get this kind of errors. But what happens in real life is that when we go live on a production server, so when actually a coder submits the website and runs in a production server, he actually disables the error reporting. So when there is an error, we cannot actually see that. So when we actually do a malformed query on SQL and hit enter, we may or may not get any results, but we will be for sure we are not going to get any error reports from the SQL server itself saying that yes, this query is a malformed query and the mistake is in this position of the statement. So we are not going to get that one. And secondly, we cannot actually manipulate the website into giving us information on plain text on the tables that we see on the website. So all we have in blind SQL injection scenario is just a true or false statement. So what is the basic difference and how can we actually exploit this true or false responses into mapping out the database and its contents? So let me just say to you that maybe you are the website yourself, and when I ask to you, in case of error-based SQL injections, which I have already taught, in those cases what we did was when I just asked you your name. So if I just say, hey sir, what is your name? So you say, yes, my name is Joe. So what can I do as a hacker is I can actually add a second part of the questions asking you, hey, what is your name, and also tell me the name of your friend. So you actually reply to me, yes, my name is Joe and my friend's name is Kurt. So in that case, we are actually asking you for an answer, and I'm actually adding another part of the question which you also answer for. But in case of blind SQL injection, there is no chance for you to actually give me an answer. Your job is just to say yes or no. So in this case, what we as hackers do is we actually ask the questions in a different way. Suppose, hey, is your name Sam? You say no. So is your name Davis? You say no. Is your name Joe? You say yes. Then I add a second part of the query and ask you, hi, is your name Joe and your friend's name is Ben? You say no. Then I again ask, hey, is your name Joe and your friend's name Kurt? You say yes. So that's how we can actually know that your friend's name is Kurt. So in this case, if you were a database and you have a table called Joe and another table called Kurt, so if your website is currently accessing the table Joe, we can actually ask you to verify for me the name of the other table that is on the same database or in a different database. That is actually depending on the hacker. So let me go ahead and show you how the website actually responds to this kind of queries. So let me just show you the code that I changed from the previous one to this one. So as you can see here, this is the code. Now you do not have to understand everything of these PHP codes, just follow me, okay? So in the search parameter variable, we just take on the value, we query the database that select star from test bb. In this case, we know that the table name is test bb, so we are going to be hypothetically forgetting it after a few moments later. So select star from test bb, where brand is equal to search parameters, and in this search parameter variable, anything that is passed from the HTML page is going to be there. So if the user searched for edifier, then this variable represents edifier. If the user searched for sound magic, this variable represents sound magic. So what I did in the previous part was just to query it right here. So I'm just querying the database. This is the query variable, and this whole statement is being given to this variable. So I'm just going to, what I did was I just passed this query onto this MySQLi query function, and in the HTML part, what I did was actually loop the database. That is, if the database or the table had suppose 10 entries, then the code will loop for 10 times. So in that case, in every loop, what you were getting in the previous website was that I was just displaying the name, the brand, the category, and the price of a product. So if it was edifier, then I would get 1700BT, then edifier, then category would be speakers, and the price was, I think, 12,500. So I actually commented out this whole code, and I added a second part to the code. That is, what I did was I just queried the database right here, and the results are being now stored into this variable. But before that, I actually passed this the results of the query into this MySQLi num rows function, which is a PHP inbuilt function for MySQLi. So what happened was, MySQLi num rows is basically counting the number of rows that is given as a result by the SQL server. So if the query was edifier, then we would just get one row saying that there is a product, in fact, called 1700BT, or for this price, whatever. So I'm just counting the number of rows and keeping that in this variable. What I'm doing is just making a condition here saying that if the number of rows is more than 1, the status is going to be 1, else the status is going to be 0. And on the HTML part, what I'm doing is I'm just making another condition saying that if the status is 1, display that the product exists, otherwise just display that the product doesn't exist. So how does this actually work in a real website? This is what I have done. So if I just type in edifier and press enter, I just get product exists. But as you can see, there is no actual information about the product 1700BT, so we cannot actually manipulate the database into giving us information from other tables or from critical tables in the web page, because there is no space in the web page to display that. Also, you can see there is, if I actually perform a malformed query, so this is going to be a malformed query, right? So if I hit enter, there is nothing called an SQL error, because if you can see what I did, was I have turned error reporting 0. So if I just comment this out for a second and do the same thing again, you will see that I get an error. See, I get a warning that my SQLi numbers and whatnot. So if I just again turn this on, which is actually done in a production server, then I get no such error messages, and I just in the display section, which is actually meant to be seen by the user, I just get that product doesn't exist. So the way we can do this, we can exploit the website into giving us more information, is via something called a blind SQL injection. Blind as in because neither we are getting an error from the SQL server, and secondly, we are not getting the actual display of the results from the malformed query that we sent to the server. So all I am getting in this scenario is a true or false response. That's it. So how are we going to manipulate the SQL server? Okay, so now before directly diving into Burp Suite and actually showing you how to exploit a blind SQL injection, I'm just going to teach you some basics of database and some key commands that we are going to use during blind SQL injection. So one of the most important would be something called a substring. One is that, and the second would be length. So these are the two things that we are going to use a lot during a blind SQL injection. So what does these two statements mean? So substring is more like a string manipulation function that is built into MySQL, and length, as it is self-explanatory, length is just the length of the word or of a value that is determined by the number of characters in a word. So how does both of these things work? So in length, I can just provide anything. So in a length function, I can just say SQLi Injection. So if I do this, then I would get a result spitting out the number of characters in this string called SQL injection. But in the case of substring, there is a little bit more to it. So in a substring, what I can do is, if I write SQLi Injection, and then after a comma, I say 1 and maybe say 5, just out of nowhere. What I will get is, now on this, the second parameter actually means the position that I want to start, and the 5 is basically the length of how many characters I actually want to see. So in this case, the starting position is 1, which means this S is actually denoted by 1 here, and I can go up till 5. So SQLin. So up till n, the MySQL server would actually show me the results SQLin. So if I did a 6 in the length, I would also get J here. But also if I just gave 1 here, so maybe substring SQL injection, comma 1, comma 1. So in that case, I would just get S. Alright, now how could we actually use this? So this is kind of the way, as I have already given you a hypothetical example, that I can actually poke you a lot of times into actually knowing a lot of information about anything that you know, but you are not going to say. So as I have already said, if I can ask you, hi, is your name Joe and your friend's name is Kurt, you are going to say yes. But if I ask you, is your name Sam and your friend's name is Davis, you are going to say no. So this is what the example I actually gave, but this property can be used here as well. So if I actually ask the database that, hi, is the first letter of your table has the value A? So how can we do that? So if we can actually ask the database, hey database, is your table name, maybe say like this, table name start with A. So in place of start with, what I'm going to do is just write substring table name 11 equals A. So this is the same thing as asking, is your first character is A? It's the same thing to ask to a database as substring table name. So table name is going to be the table name. Maybe that if the table name is test, for example, then the first character, I'm asking the database for the first character up till the length of 1. So this basically means the first and only first character. So I'm asking, hey DB, is your table name start with A? You say no. So I do it with B, then C, then D, then E, F, Until unless I come to t, it will always say no, but when it comes to t, we get a positive value that yes, from the database. So when we do get this value, what we can do is now change the start position to 2, because we have already figured out the first character on the word, or which in this case is the name of the table. So we can go with t and it will stop at a, it will stop at e, saying that yes, I have e on the second letter on the table that I have. So in that case, we can thus figure out the third character and the fourth character, and upon finishing the fourth character, we can actually know that the name of the table was actually test. So this is how we can actually brute force the database by continuously asking it that an information which we do not know, but kind of asking it in a different way, so thus it gives us a positive and negative result which we can use to actually map out the database. So let's go to MySQL and actually try these things out. So I have MySQL open right here. So if I just do the previous queries, select star from test bb where name equals e10c. So we actually did get these things before. Now just forget that this row actually exists, because in a blind SQL injection scenario we cannot actually see these things, right? So I'm just going to demonstrate how these things work. So if I do this and okay, let me just show you the use of the substring character. So if I just do select star from test bb where substring brand. So brand is going to be the table, the column name here. So the brand which starts with maybe the first character is going to be S. In that case, I will get sound magic. If I do the same with F, see, we get an empty set. But we already know that there is a brand called edifier. So edifier starts with E. So if I do E, we are getting the row that gives me the information about edifier. So in this scenario as well, we can actually use the union statement where we can actually join two queries, and in case of blind SQL injection, we actually want two queries that will give a result of true. So up until it is false, so maybe we have tried all the 25 letters and all of the responses from the website were false, but on the letter Z maybe we get a true response. In that case, we know that what we actually wanted from the union select statement actually got a true response from the database. So if I actually do union select here, let's see what we get. Where name equals e10c union select 1 2 3 4 5, because we are just going to use these as filling the blanks kind of thing. So union select 1 2 3 4 5 from test bb where substring brand 1 1, which means the first character, is equals to a. So you can see that we only get one row, because the first part of the query is perfectly okay, right? So we get the results from for the first part of the query, but we do not actually get the results for the second part of the query, right? So if we actually do these things and try with B, nope, yes, we got something for B. I don't know why. So let me just check it. What did we actually get from B? So if I just do a name here, so we will see. Okay, there is something called a 302 USB, I guess. Okay, there is a brand called Behringer, right? So that's why it gave me the answer. So if I do C, we get nothing. If I do D, we get nothing. So if I go E, we get something. That is, we are getting the name 1700BT. But we are not supposed to see this, right? What I actually want you to see here is that if there is an extra row or not. So as you can see here, this extra row, that is 1 2 3 4 5, is only present here when the second part of the query is also a right query and such value also exists on the database. So if I actually remove the first part of the query, and by remove I mean if the first part of the query is something that the database doesn't know, then what happens? Because when I have showed you this code, You do remember, right? What I've done here is that I'm actually counting the number of rows, and if the number of rows is greater than equal to 1, I would get a status of 1 and get a status of 0 otherwise. So in this case, you can see if that code was actually given here, we would get a status of 1 every time, because if even this part of the query is not recognized by the database, so if the character was D, see, there is no second row here, because there is no product in the database or in this table that starts with the letter D. There is none. So that's why we are not getting a second column, but the first column we are actually getting. So if I actually implement this code here, we actually get one row back. So by that way, the status is going to be 1, and we are going to see that the product actually exists. What we can do here is we can give some value for the first query that does not exist in the database and see if the second part of the query comes in. So when the first part of the query, the value is unknown to the database, no rows will be displayed, and on the second part of the query, if the value is not known by the database, no row will be displayed either. But if the first part of the query is not known to the database and the second part of the query is known to the database, then we would get one row back. So if I actually manage to do that, then also we are going to get a status code of 1, and we are going to be getting a response from the web browser saying that the value is true. That way we can actually figure out the contents of the database by actually manipulating the second part of the query. So if I actually do this, let me just first make this E so we can get 2 rows, but in case of a blind SQL injection, or in the case of this code, 2 rows or 3 rows or 1 rows or a million rows doesn't matter. If the number of rows is greater than 1, we get a true response. If the number of rows is lesser than 1, we get a false response. So the number of rows written by the MySQL is 2, 3 or a million, doesn't matter. We just only want to know if a row is returned by the MySQL server, and to be actually sure of that, we are going to give a value on the MySQL database that does not exist on the database. So on the second part of the query, if there is something that the database knows, we are getting a true value, or we are getting one row back, which means there is a true value. So we are actually sure at this point that we know that the first part of query didn't give us a row. If there was a row, then it was not because of the first part of the query, because the first part of the query doesn't have any value that the MySQL database knows about. So it is only possible for the second part of the query to be actually executed and given a row back by the MySQL server. So if I do this and maybe ask, so the first part of the query, now in a website this part is not controllable by the user, right? So the only part of the control for the first part of the query that the user gets is the value. So we already know that there is in fact a product called E10C, but there is no product called E10, right? So if I delete this and press enter, see, we get one result. Now where did this row come from? Now this is not definitely because of the first query, because there is no product in the database called E10C, but on the second part of the query there in fact is a brand name within this table that starts with the letter E. So that's why we get a row back, and from this part of my code I just only did that if there is a row returned by the SQL server, we say that it's a positive response or the product actually exists. So this is one way that we can actually use the injections to actually ask the website in a different way by actually poking the website with wrong answers until and unless it hits a right one, and the database response changes a little bit by saying it that yes, this is a true response. So now let's move on to the actual injection part and how we can gather the information about the database and its tables, thus performing a successful blind SQL injection. Now one thing I almost forgot to show you was the length. So if I do the same query and maybe say that select star from test BB where name is E10, union select 1 2 3 4 5 where length of brand is going to be 2. So if I press enter, okay, why I'm getting this? Okay, from test BB where length brand is going to be 2. So we are getting an empty set. So let's try with 3. We are still getting an empty set. Let's try with 4. We are still getting an empty set. 5, empty. 6, empty. 7. Yes, we do get a row back, and thus we can actually know there is a table which has a column name called brand, and within that brand column name there are some values which has a length of 7. So we actually brute forced the table into spitting out this information by actually seeing a true or false response. So all of these returned empty set which can denote a false, but in this case we are getting a true value that there is such a product. So now in a blind SQL injection scenario we cannot actually see these type of information at all, so we cannot actually verify anything. What we can do is when the website returns a positive value, then we can know that there is such a value within the brand column within this table that has a length of 7. So when we do get a length of 7, a positive way to brute force it would be, we can actually do this by like saying, as we now know that the length of the value is 7, we can actually use substring to do that as well. So if I do 7 here, so you can see that in the substring function we are targeting the column called brand. Now we are starting at the first character and we are moving way up to 7. So if I do anything of 7 characters, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we would get nothing, an empty set. If I do maybe money heist, maybe, why not? We are getting an empty set. But if we do edifier, we get a response back. Thus we can know there is a value within the table which corresponds to edifier. So we can use length in this way along with substring to actually brute force data from the website by actually seeing the true or false responses from the website. Okay, now if you remember when I was talking about errors, so when I was saying that in the first part of the query if there is a value error, which means no such element exists on the database, then we would get nothing out of the database. But on the second part of the query, if the statement is true, then we would get a response back, a true response back from the SQL server or website. And then if the both part of the queries has a valid value that the database knows about, then we will get 2 rows back. But we do not need to bother about the 2 rows. So in that case, we need to give intentionally wrong value in the first part of the query, thus making the database spit out no such rows. And on the second part of the query, and we are going to brute force into getting back a positive response from the website. So if you remember that, one thing that I didn't tell at that time was there are 2 types of errors. One is the value error and one is the syntax error. Okay, so only in case of value error this applies, which means if there is a value error, and by value error I mean that if the value given by the user in the search box is not present on the database, then only we will get nothing back from the website. And on the second part of the query, if also the value is not present on the SQL server, then we will not also get a response back. But if the second part of the query has a value on the database, then we will get a true response. All of this scenario only works if there is a value error in either one or both of the section of the queries. But in case of a syntax error, we are going to get an SQL error as well. But in this case, we are not going to see an SQL error being displayed on the website. So when we are trying to gather information from the website, from the SQL server in a blind SQL injection scenario, we can only intentionally go for value-oriented errors, but not syntax errors. Because in case of syntax errors, if even the values are right, so in the first part of the query, maybe there is a brand called verifier. On the second part of the query, if even the brute force is perfectly okay, then we will also get an error back, because that will mean there is a syntax error in the whole query that you have injected onto the SQL server. So you are going to be very careful with the query here, because if you have a value error or if you have a syntax error, you will get no notification from the website that this is a syntax error or this is a value error. So you won't get such thing. So even if there is a syntax error, the website will give you a negative response. So if I give a syntax error here, so maybe this is a syntax error, right? I will still just get product does not exist. We are not going to get a SQL error back. We are just going to get a product doesn't exist message. So in case of both value and syntax errors, we are going to just get a negative response from the website. So we are going to have to be very careful on what we inject. So let's start with the injection. Now to verify even if the website is injectable or not, we are going to give in some kind of queries which are universally true. So for example, if I give in edifier and 1 equals 1 and comment sign. Remember, the comment sign is very important in every case of SQL injection. So if I search for it, I will say I will get a response, a true response, saying that the product actually exists. Because if you see the parameter here, this, if I actually write this in my virtual machine, you can actually see this is what the query was actually executed like. So select star from test BB where brand equals to edifier and 1 is equal to 1. So this is going to be, this quote is going to be ignored because of the comment sign. So this is the query that has actually been passed to the SQL server, and both of the queries are actually syntactually and value oriented wise both are correct. So there is actually a product in the database that has a brand of edifier. So up until this part, the query is perfectly okay, both syntax and value wise, and also syntax and value wise, this part of the query is also perfectly okay because 1 is universally equal to 1. So we do get a result back from the website that the product actually exists. But what happens if I give product equal to edifier and 1 is equal to 2? Now this is going to be not a syntax error because this type of syntax is actually allowed in MySQL, but this is going to be a value error, right? Because 1 is not equal to 2. So what should be the response from the website? Let's see. We get product does not exist. Of course the product does not exist. So that's how we actually know that the database is vulnerable to SQL injection. Maybe it's a blind or error based, but we actually know from this part that the website is actually vulnerable to SQL injection. Okay, now as we have established the fact that this website is SQL injectable, we are now directly going to move up to Burp Suite and perform SQL injection, the blind one of course, to gather any critical information about the database if exists. So first we need to enumerate the number of columns in our current table. Now you might ask that we are not getting any information back from the database, we are not getting anything displayed on the screen, we are not even getting the information about the product itself, we are just getting a boolean value. So why do we need to figure out the number of columns in the table? So the answer would be, see, what we want to do with the information that is being given out by the database is dependent on the programmer. So I want to display the data on the website, or I want to give a boolean value result that is either true or false, or a product exists or not. All of this information or all of this manipulation is done by the programmer, not the SQL. So anything you pass in this box is going to be directly executed by the SQL server. So for both of the blind and the error based cases, the same exact returns will be given by the SQL server. It is completely dependent on the programmer to decide what he wants to do with the information that is given out by the SQL server. So when I actually perform a union select statement, that is there are two parts of the queries that exist. That is on the first part of the union select statement, on the second part of the union select statement, the whole query is being executed by the SQL server, not by me or the PHP programmer or the website developer. So the results or what to do with the result might be dependent on the programmer, but the original values or the original query is not executed by the programmer, it is executed by the database itself. So what I want you to clearly remember is that when there is a column mismatch in the query, the problem will be handled and executed by the SQL server. Now it's a syntax error or a value error, and what to do with these errors, these are decided by the programmer. So that's why this is a blind SQL injection, and I already said to you that it's an error based or a value based error doesn't matter here, because if there is a row returned by the SQL server, I'm going to show you that a product exists. If there is no rows returned by the SQL server, then I'm going to show you product doesn't exist. But what I didn't program here is that for a syntax error the result will be different, for a value error the result will be different. I didn't do anything of such kind. So for both of the syntax and value errors, I'm just going to get no returns from the database, which will mean that I will also get product not found message on the website. So if there is a column mismatch, so if I just go to my code and see, I have done select star from. So if I have done select name from test bb, for example, and then it will only return one column. So in that case, we can actually run a query like select, if it was just name and I just did like something like maybe select name from xxx where y equals zzz. So this would be the query that is actually structured by the programmer. So on the only control that you have is on the zzz part. So if you did edifier here, and on the second part of the union query, which is going to be injected onto the SQL server, is select 1 2 3 from, okay, not like this, select 1 2 3 from xxx whatever. So in that case, you can see that the original intent of the statement was to only give me one column, but I am getting results of 3 columns here. So this whole query would be executed by the SQL server, and in the point of view of the SQL server, this would be a column mismatch because we are filling in the blanks for 3 columns, but the database is only has been instructed to return us 1 column. So there will be a column mismatch, and it will be considered as a syntax error. But in the case of syntax error as well, my website will say to you that the product doesn't exist. So you have to manually check for where the website actually returns product exists. So if it was star, which is in this case of my website, it actually is. So in my website it is select star from. So we do not actually know how many columns are there in this current table. So if the number of columns that is filled in by garbage values is not equal to the number of columns written by this star is not same, then the SQL will handle that, and SQL will give us an error. Now we cannot actually see the error, that is dependent on the programmer, but the SQL is actually having an error by itself. So we need to figure out the number of columns that is to be displayed, or that is to be passed into the SQL server in an injectable way, because as I have already said you, and please remember this for the rest of your life in this field of course, is that whatever it is done by the programmer, you are least bothered about it, but the whole query is directly being handled by the SQL server, and if the number of columns from the first part of the query doesn't match the number of columns in the second part of the query, the SQL will throw an error by itself. It doesn't matter what the website or the programmer or the developer intended it like to. So we are going to first figure out the number of columns in this current table, so we can actually go ahead and do the other injectable queries and not care about if there is a syntax error or a value error. We are just going to concentrate on value error mainly, not the syntax error. So we are going to figure out the number of columns so we do not get a syntax error. So let's go ahead and open up Burp Suite. Okay, so let's open up Burp Suite, and probably I've already told you that the main two functions, the main two built-in MySQL functions that we are going to use is going to be substring and length. Right, so substring, as I've already told you, it's an internal string manipulation function for MySQL, and the length is to figure out total number of characters in a string. So let's, the burp suite is open, and let's capture the same request with burp suite this time. I'm going to send it to repeater and also to intruder. Now I'm not going to be going on to much details about the burp suite modules, but keep it on briefs. So intruder is the module within Burp Suite that we are going to use the brute force on, and the repeater is what you already know if you have seen my previous videos. So let's first figure out the number of columns in this current table. So this figuring out of the number of columns part is pretty much similar to of the error-based SQL injection. So let's try ahead and do this. So edifier union plus select. Now I'm going to just delete edifier, the reason being, if the both of the statements are perfectly okay, and even the first part of the statement is perfectly okay, we are going to be getting at least one row returned from the SQL server, which means I'm going to get a positive response from my website saying that yes, the product exists. So I have to manually go ahead and give a wrong value for the first part of the query, so that the first part of the query doesn't return any results, but the second part of the query is what we are mainly going to concentrate on. So I'm just going to give it X, maybe, whatever it is, I don't care. So union select 1, and that's it. Let me see what happens. Send, and the product doesn't exist. Okay, no problem. So let's try with 2. Product doesn't exist. So let me try with 3 columns. Doesn't exist. 4 columns. Doesn't exist. 5 columns. Yep, product exists, which means that a row has been written by the MySQL server, which means that the number of columns in this current database is 5, because this being the second part of the query and the original part of the query that has been originally intended by the programmer, both of the queries that is passed to the SQL server actually matches the number of columns for both of the parts of the SQL union select statements. So now, as we have figured out that the number of columns is going to be 5, we are going to keep this part of the query same for all of the queries that we are going to use next. Okay, so as we have figured out the number of columns, this part is going to be the same, but let me just figure out what are the tables that exists in this current database. So if you remember from the previous videos, the database that holds this kind of information is the information schema database. Within that we have a table called tables, which holds all the information about all the tables that exist in the SQL server. So I'm going to do the same, which is union select 1 2 3 4 5 plus from information schema dot tables, where table schema not equals information schema. So I'm going to copy and paste these a couple of times. So, and performance schema not equal to performance schema. Then again, and table schema not equal to php my admin, and if table schema is not equal to MySQL. Now this part of the query you already know from the previous tutorials of mine, but I'm going to add some specifics to it. And length of table name, and this is the column that we are going to target, equals 1. So let me check if the query I did is okay. Select 1 2 3. Okay, this doesn't matter. I have done a okay, maybe this doesn't matter because we are not going to get any information back on the website. I think this is the right query. Okay, so let me copy and paste this here and see what happens. Product exists. Why? So there is a length of a table name that represents 1. I don't think so, but why did it give such? So let me, okay, I have done a mistake. Oh shit. Now is this okay? Okay, no. So this is the problem I did. We are getting double queries. So yes, okay. Now let me see. Product doesn't exist. Okay. Now let's try with 2 here, which means I'm trying for a table whose total number of characters is 2. Very ironical to exist. So let's try with 3. Doesn't exist. Perfect. So let's try with 4. Doesn't exist. Perfect. Let's try with 5. Okay, so I get a positive result from the website saying that the product actually exists, which means we have a table that has a length of 5 characters. Now I have to use the substring to figure out each of the characters. But one thing to notice here is that maybe there is a table who has a length of 5 characters, but there are other tables who are maybe not of length 5 characters, but when I actually do it with substring, it will be figuring out the first, second, third, fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh positions of all the tables that exist on the same database. So we are going to add another clause to the query that I am only looking for a table whose length is 5, because if I do not mention this particular length clause, then it will be doing the substring query for all of the tables that exists in the database. So I'm going to add something here. I already know that the length of the table name is going to be 5, but then again add another part of the query, that is and substring table name, the position and the length is going to be A. So now this is going to be, let me first try it here and see what happens. Product exists. Why do I get a product exist? Okay, I think, oh my god, why am I making the same mistakes again? Okay, send. Yes, product doesn't exist. So let me go with B. Product doesn't exist. So if there was just a way to automate this whole process, yes there is, and that is where intruder comes in. So what I'm going to do is first clear all the positions, all the brute force positions, and then on the parameter section I'm going to copy and paste whatever I wrote on the repeater right here. So in this part I'm going to automate these two parts, that is the position of the substring and the value, because what I want actually for it to work here is that first on the first position of the first position of the string, which is in this case table name, it will go from A to Z. So if there is a match, it will move on to the second position and then again start from A to Z. If there is a match, then it will move on to the third position and it will go from A to Z, and this loop will be happening automatically and we do not have to do a single thing but just wait. So as I have done this, you need to remember right here that this is going to be the first position and this is going to be the second position. So I'm going to cluster bomb this, go to payloads, and this is the first position as I have told. For the first position, what will we give in this section, which is going to be the value? So how many of the iterations that we want to make? So what I actually mean to say is for how many times this value will change. It should be 5, no? Because we have already figured out from the previous query that the length of the table name that we are targeting is 5. So when that is the case, I want for this to only iterate up till 5, because if it increases from 5 or it is decreased from 5, we will get only a table name which has with a value of 4. Maybe what I mean to say is if the name of the table is admin, for example, we will only get A, D, M and I, but not the N, because I have only given intruder the permission to loop for 4 times. But if I give it something more than 5, in that case it will also start to figure out the other names of the databases. But that will actually not happen exactly, because we have already given a clause that it will only work for tables that only has a length specifically of 5. So I think I have made it pretty clear. So let's go to payloads, and on the first position we are going to iterate the first position up till 5 characters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it will iterate up till 5 times, and what will it iterate with? That will be all the characters in my keyboard. Now for time consumption reasons, I have made the database with only small letter characters, and that is only letters, no alphanumeric characters are being used. So if I do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So if everything is perfect, then we would go to the options. Now we have something that now all of these things you have probably understood it right now, that all of the things can be done manually, but it's going to be hugely time consuming. So what I'm going to do here in the grep math section is that we want to make this more easy by actually automating the process with burp suite, that the burp suite will automatically say to me that on which requests, on which positions of the string and on which characters we have got a product exists message from the website, because we have already figured out that when there is no value errors in the query, and when there is a match in a value, we will get a result from the website saying that the product actually exists. So we can actually automate that as well and figure out on how many requests we got a product exists and figure out the information from those messages that is also being given by Burp Suite. So I'm going to add product exists because the result we get from the website is product exists. So let's add this and let me check if everything is all right and go ahead and start the attack. So this is going to be taking some time. I'm going to fast forward this section of the video. Okay, so as you can see that 50% of the job is done. 130 requests is the total number of requests that will be executed by Burp Suite. And if I actually drop down, you can see that one match has been found that is on the position 3. On the third position of the table name, we have found a match that there is an E that exists on the third position of the table name. So it will be going to figure out the characters for all of the positions. So if I actually drop down here, you can actually see that the payload is 4 and the payload is A, which means it is trying all combinations of A for all of the positions of the total length or total name of the table. So you can see that here we can actually see that on the first request we are having that on the first position we are trying with A. On the second request we are trying on the second position with A. On the third request we are trying on the third position with A. On the fourth position we are trying with A. On the fifth position we are trying with A, and none of these gave a match. So on the next section of the queries we are again trying the first position with B, second position with B, and so on and so on. It will go up till on all of the 5 positions, and it will try with A to Z, A to Z, A to Z. So for the first character it will try from A to Z, on the second character it will try from A to Z, and so on and so on. And just let me wait a little bit more and finish this. Okay, so as you can see that we had a total of 5 characters, and even if the whole process has not been finished, we have already got 5 such matches. So if I just open up Notepad and figure the positions along with the values, on the first position we have U, so U. On the second position we have S, so it goes as S. On the third position we have E. On the fourth position we have R. And on the fifth position we have again S. So users is a table that exists in our current database. This is another table that exists in our current database, right? So let's stop this attack. And so now one part of the section is done, that we have figured out that there is a table called users that exists in the same database that we are using. Okay, so we know that we have a table called users. So now let's go and figure out the names of the columns. So I'm going to save a lot of time here right now, because we can actually go and perform the same kind of SQL injections from starting positions to ending positions to figure out character by character. But we can actually use a more of a common way to inject SQL, which is going to be what is by experience the things that actually stays in the table like users. So we know that the things that has a lot of probability of staying in the users table is something maybe like user ID, user pass, user name, password. So these type of things actually exist, right, in a users table. So we are going to try with all of these things as a brute force word list. So now what I'm going to do is do the same query, that is union select 1 2 3 4 5 from information schema.columns, where table name is equal to users plus and substring column name. What is the highest number of characters we have? So password and username both are 8 characters long. So I'm going to do with the highest positions, or the length is going to be 8, equals to a. Why not? I'm just going to brute force it just as well. So I'm going to copy paste this right here. So this is going to be the same thing, but in this part we are just going to give it maybe, okay, why not, maybe just do it with 1 here, because let us gradually figure out the names of the tables, and this is going to be same, no problem. So let us give here a payload position. This is going to be iterated, and this is going to be the second position, right? Perfect. So now let's go to the payload section, and here we are going to add 8 more, because the highest number of characters in our word list is 8. So let's go ahead and add 6, 7 and 8. Now on the second list we are going to remove all of them and add those words. So maybe users, why not? Username, pass, username, password, and I'm going to stop at this, and let me, and this is options, the product exists message is going to be the same for all of our attacks today. So let's go ahead and start the attack and see what happens. Nice. So you can see that all of the user and pass and username and password got a positive result, but we are just going to try with username and password. Alright, because if username and password didn't get a positive result, then we could be sure of that user and pass is the name of the columns. But username and password, we also got a positive result from the website, which means that on the 4th position, on the length of 4, user and pass also got a hit, because these 2 words also exist in these words. So whatever. Now we are going to try and figure out a value within the column called username. So for that, the query would be something like select 12345 from information schema. Okay, this is going to be deleted. So 12345 from users where substring username 11 is equal to A. So this time we are going to brute force on this query. So let me go ahead and copy paste this. So in this time we are going to add the payload positions in here. Again, like the first query, we are going to go bit by bit. Okay, so now I am doing this in a more simplistic way because I already know the contents of my database, right? I'm just doing this for the ease of learning purpose, but in a real life you would also have to figure out the length of the username, the length of the password, and then go from 0 to step 5, maybe, whatever it is, gradually. But because I already know the contents of the database, I'm just going to skip all the hard work. Okay, so as I know, because I made the database, that there is a username called admin, and the password is also admin, alright? But let me just see that the way I'm doing this, it happens or not. So I am going to go to payload, maybe leave this like that, but on the second list, I am again going from all the characters. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. So let me check if everything is alright. So let's start the attack. So you can see we already got a match. So now what I want to tell you here is that in a normal case you have to again go to the information schema.columns and personally figure out the length of the values, which is maybe admin is 5 characters long. I personally know that, but I want to show you that it can be done if you do not know. So you have to first figure out the length of the contents within a table. So if there is a column called username, there should be a username within it as well. So you have to first measure out the length of the username, and then you can brute force the username letter by letter, character by character, or by the whole words itself. So you can actually do, like, if you figure out that the length of the username is 5, then you can substring there and give it like substring username comma 1, which is going to be the starting position, comma 5, which is going to be the total length of the password, and then u equals to, you can try all of the common names that MySQL generally has. So it can start from maybe root, admin, super user, whatever it is. You can fill up a whole word list and it will try all the words from the word list to see that if there is a match. But I personally know that we have the username and password within this table called users, and within those columns there are a value called a username, which is in this case admin, and for a password, the password is also admin, but I'm just showing you in this simpler way just for you to understand better. So that is what I'm trying to do, because if I actually wanted to go from ground zero to level 100 on actually mapping out a whole database, it would, believe me, take more than a day. So that's why I'm just going to be keeping this on a very short video, and I guess this video will also take an hour or more, but still I tried my best to make it quicker. So I'm going to again fast forward to the end of this scan so that we can save a little bit of more time. Okay, so as you can see that I have got matches on 5 characters here and it's still running on, but I personally know that the length of my username was 5. So just by looking at it, you can see that A, D would be the first ones, so 3 would be M, 4 would be I, and 5th would be N, so admin. So that's how we could know that the username for the table users would be admin. So I can just stop this rack right now, and by a query of a similar level you can actually find the password for the same username by just adding one clause, is that where username, because we already have figured out that the column name for the username is username, so we can actually do where username is equal to admin and substring, and this time it's the column name we are going to target is going to be password, because we also have found out that the column names within the users table are username and password. So by doing this, that we are saying particularly that select garbages from users where username is going to be admin and the password's first character is going to be A, and we are going to brute force that by saying that password's position of 2 is A to Z, password position of 1 is A to Z, password position of 3 is A to Z, and where it gets a match we will know by burp suit, and that's how we can actually also figure out the password for the username admin. And personally I know that the password for admin is also admin, so I'm not going to waste time there, but I can actually show you that I'm right. So I know that the admin is 5 characters long, so if I do 5 and give it as admin, maybe at my M, so if I copy this line and go to repeater, do the same thing and search for it and send the value, you will see product doesn't exist because I have made intentionally a syntax error. But if I do N in place of N, I should get a product exists. So say this is how automatically burp suit does figure out the details of a website. So now there are many things that is still waiting to be shown, but that is going to be taking a lot of time, even more than a day. So this is where I'm going to end this video. This is what I can show you for now about blind SQL injection, and thus you can go ahead and search for other tables on the same database, maybe other tables on another database. So you can go ahead and brute force your way up to finding everything that is to find on a database and map out the whole database, and thus you can own a complete website or a complete database. So this is something that I wanted to show you from requests on Reddit on how to do blind SQL injection. So this is it. This is where I'm going to end the video. I hope I was able to make you understand. But first of all, I don't think that I was completely as clear as I wanted it to be, because first of all, this topic is kind of new to me, not entirely new, but kind of new to me. But the things are actually complex here in a way that your tongue gets twisted by saying each of the letters and each of the words on and on and on a lot of times. So that's why I think I have made a fair job of making you understand what blind SQL injection is, and this is how you can escalate your privileges up to mapping out a whole database. So this is going to be the end of the video. So I think you will like this as well as you have liked my previous 2 videos. So Until next time, goodbye.